My name is Tom DeRosa. I'm from Creation Studies Institute. We're doing a program exposing the great myths of evolution. It's a series, and it deals with these myths, these lies that are perpetrated through our society. You know that Satan is the greatest liar of all. And the lie about where we come from is extremely important. If you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going to go. It's very important to have an origin. And God spoke of the origin in Genesis 1. And so we want to refer to the origin, the creation account, Genesis 1 to 12, because we started in 12, we began the gospel, began the premonition of the gospel. We got the foundation from Genesis 1 to 11 of the physical things that we see. It mentions the Tower of Babel, it mentions the great flood. These are things that are evident in our culture, in our world today. So we want to be able to show you this, but also in chapter 12, we see that it begins the idea of Moses and the idea of Abraham and the Jewish covenant. So it's important that we keep Genesis chapter 12 in there. So as we begin, I wanted to focus on this myth today. What are the untold problems of the Big Bang? Now that's a question, that's not a myth. So let's put it in the right term. It's important that we know, where does everything come from, you see? So this myth that we're going to tackle today is very basic. It's very important. It's very foundational. So we deal with this idea. The Big Bang is the origin of all matter and energy. And what we're really saying is the Big Bang is the origin of everything, even you, everything around us. So think about that. That really takes the place of God, doesn't it? It doesn't take a creator God. It's very materialistic. And we have to understand that when we talk about these things, about the great myths, exposing the great myths of evolution, we want people to be aware of what we're focusing on. We're focusing on these lies. And there is a big lie when it deals with origins, the origins of where everything came from. So as we look at this, we're going to be looking at there's massive void in understanding the origins and the mechanism of the Big Bang. So that's the first thing. And what we're trying to do is give you a series exposing the myths of evolution. We're trying to give you something that you can carry home with you, something that you can lean on and think about, because the whole idea is being able to witness what 1 Peter 3:15 says, that we are going to give a reason for the hope that we have within us. So we want to be able to give a reason to those who are around us. And you have a reason. It affirms God's word. So the first point we're going to talk about, there's a massive void in understanding the origins, understanding the Big Bang. Point number 2, the universe is missing 95% of its matter and energy. So when you think about that, that's pretty significant, that there's a lot of things missing in the universe. Now, when you think about that, I don't know if you know this, but 95% of the universe is missing. So, and then they're fine-tuned with physical laws, mathematical constants. The universe points to a spiritual intelligence. The universe itself represents intelligence because everything is so fine-tuned. So as we begin this, we'll look in terms of point 1. There is a huge void in understanding the origins and the mechanism of the Big Bang. So in better terms, there is a massive void in understanding the origins and mechanism of the Big Bang, even though there is observable data on the expansion of the universe, black hole phenomena, and Einstein's relativity. So I'd like you to be aware of that, because you can see a black hole, as you see before you, is actually moving. We can observe this in space. We can observe the black holes. We can observe something going on in that area. And of course, Einstein's relativity laws are important because it gives us a vision that time can change. And we never knew that time can change, but time can change. We know that God is the author of time, so we fully understand that principle. Now, as we look at the universe and we look at this idea, for some unknown reason, the Big Bang exploded. Do you understand that? For some unknown reason, the Big Bang exploded. We don't know how it happened, but it exploded. So keep that in mind. It's a big mystery. We know that as we look at the universe, there's many that don't understand this. And I thought that I give you somebody that Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's very famous narrator on television. He's written books. He's a very, very important astronomer and atheist. He's an atheist. And this is what he says.
The world has persisted many a long year, having once been set going to program. From these, everything else follows. Lucretius. In the beginning, about 13.7 billion years ago, all the space and all the matter and all the energy of the known universe was contained in a volume less than 1/trillionth the size of the point of a pin. Conditions were so hot, the basic forces of nature that collectively described the universe were unified. For reasons unknown, this sub-pinpoint-sized cosmos began to expand. When the universe was a piping hot 10 to the 30th degrees and a youthful 10 to the minus 43 seconds long, before which all of our theories of matter and space break down and have no meaning. Black holes spontaneously formed, disappeared, and formed again out of the energy contained within the unified field. Under these extreme conditions, and what is admittedly speculative physics, the structure of space and time became severely curved as it gurgled into a spongy foam-like hole. During this epoch, phenomena described by Einstein's general theory of relativity, the modern theory of gravity, and quantum mechanics, the description of matter in the smallest scales, were indistinguishable from one another. As the universe continued to expand and cool, gravity split from the other forces. Quickly thereafter, the strong nuclear force and the electroweak force split from each other, which was accompanied by an enormous release of stored energy that induced a rapid 30 power of 10 increase in the size of the universe. The rapid expansion of the universe, known as the epoch of inflation, stretched and smoothed out the cosmic distribution of matter and energy so that
So, what do you think? I think there's a lot of unanswered questions. Did you notice that? Okay, let's take a look at, I caught this sentence and I just want to, two sentences actually, I want to just go over it with you. In the beginning, about 13.7 billion years ago, all the space, all the matter, all the energy of the known universe was contained in a volume less than 1/trillionth the size than of a point of a pin. Okay, can you imagine that? I can't. I can't. But there are people that believe in this, that everything was so small and started from that pin size. Conditions were so hot that basic forces that collectively describe the universe were unified for reasons unknown. The subconform point cosmos began to expand. So from the very beginning of expansion, there is a total unknown. You follow? So when you listen carefully, you get the idea that this is a story, this is a spin, this is kind of somebody telling a tale. Because what science do we have? Now, what they've done is cherry pick. There are things like breaking up atoms and so on, and we know how that works. So they kind of threw that in there and just reversed the operations. But let's take a look at this a little more clearly and see what he was talking about. So we're talking about this universe expansion. And if you take a look, we have this Big Bang that was 1/trillionth the size of a pinpoint, okay, and had all matter and energy, and all of a sudden exploded. We don't know how it happened, but it exploded. And when this stuff exploded, it started to cool and condense. And we started to get things like the photons, and the photons broke up, and we had antimatter and matter. A lot of these questions are things that we are looking at today and saying, how could this happen? Now, there's antimatter and matter. Those are things that we know of. But the question here is that we haven't seen this. Nobody has observed this. So this is a big conjecture. We look at the first stars in early galaxies. And as you're going to see, that took millions and millions of years just to get to. So we have this idea of this big inflation, and then today bringing up to modern galaxies. So we don't have a very good origin point, do we? We can't observe this. We see that it's kind of speculated. No one has observed this illustration. The expansion of the universe is highly speculative. So let's go to the next one, and we're going to see what the universe might have looked like from the idea of starting from nothing. So they talk about zero. They talk about 380,000 years. And that time, all of a sudden, this supposedly, you ready for this? This 300 or this 3K times the 30th power, which nobody really has ever seen this amount of heat. Nobody's ever observed this. Nobody's ever observed that amount of heat. Not even in the universe. We have to put all the stars together, get all the energy. So we look at this and we say, wait a minute. We haven't seen that, but they're speculating. They put that in their equation. And this is why I want to teach this stuff, because I feel that there's a lot of things not being told to the public. You see, there's a lot of mystery. So when a scientist speaks, nobody questions. But I think as Christians, we need to question. We need to be critical about what's being taught to us, especially when it goes against the word of God. So we see that the Big Bang produced all the heavenly bodies. You see them right before your very eyes, including the planets, the stars, the whole works, galaxies, stars, planets, and meteorites, just like that. So we know that without a known cause, the universe and everything that has happened in it since the beginning of time are in grand effect without a known cause. Who said that? Robert Jastrow, founder and former director of the Goddard Institute of Space Studies at NASA. That's a pretty well distinguished job. And in the turn 2000, he made these statements. And I'm going to tell you something that makes you think, because we really don't know about how things started. So let's take a look at this. Cosmic evolution or Big Bang have never been observed. It's a one-time event. It's no empirical data from that point on we've seen. We have some things like an expanding universe. We have heat that's supposedly left over, but to make a conjecture that this happened, that everything was squeezed together, it's hard for us to even explain. It's hard for us to even imagine. So we have no empirical data. It's theoretical in nature, and there's many theories proposed. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, so if I told you I have many theories on this idea, I don't have the data. It's only a one-time event. I mean, how do you believe something like that? I mean, it's hard for me to, well, somebody's coming and telling you there was an accident on the road, and they go and tell you everything, and you have no empirical data. You just have to believe them, right? That's what it tells you. You just have to believe them. So when we look at this carefully, we see that what causes particles of matter to coalesce, the Big Bang caused matter and energy to separate and move outward at tremendous speeds. At some time, it had to coalesce and come together. Modern physics, the laws that are before us say this. Harvard astrophysicist Abraham Lopes stated that the truth is that we don't understand star formation at a fundamental level. We don't understand how things coalesce at such high energies. How does that happen? That's a big question. We move on, and we see that when it comes to understanding the idea, I like this one. This is Practical Joe. He says this: can an explosion produce order? Have you ever seen an explosion produce order? No. The Big Bang violates the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics says that there's always entropy around us. Explosions make entropy. What's entropy? Disorder. It's disorder. Nature goes to disorder. Big Bang reverses everything, everything. So when I look at the scripture, God is speaking to me, because this is God's words. This is David writing. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. I want to pause and reflect on this for a moment. I want to tell you that the stars are not only present where you are, but the stars are present where every human person exists. So we have a basis, we have a common basis. You know why now, why astronomy became the queen of science? Because we can easily observe the stars. We can see this marvelous, magnificent universe on the starry night. And we can see that these stars are so well placed and so far, because they look, they're at night. There's always mysterious, there's mystery in the night. You're looking at dark space and void space, and you see these light particles coming from the sky. And so David takes this and says, look at the heavens. See, God is declaring his glory right there. God is declaring his glory. And they poured forth speech. In other words, the idea of these stars being everywhere is really signifying God's glory so everybody can recognize him and see him. Of course, we know what happened. We know what happened with the stars. Astronomy became astrology. Astrology became other gods, as we've seen in what we see as we observe the universe. So so we look and we see that so the nearest star, have you ever thought about where the nearest star is? It's called Proxima Centauri. There's a bunch of stars, Alpha Centauri, close to us. It's a binary star, but this one is the third star. It's called Proxima Centauri. That's the closest star to us. It's 4.22 light years away. And whenever I think of light years, it's hard for me to talk to you in light years, because unless you're into astronomy, you'll understand what light years are. But in common language, it's 24.7 trillion miles. Now, you're familiar with the word trillion because that's been thrown around a lot. $1 trillion here. But now we're talking about trillion miles. That's like 24 zeros. I mean, 12 zeros, 0, 0, 0, 12 zeros. So you get the idea of what we're trying to talk about. Light year is equal to the distance light can travel in 1 year in 5,888 trillion miles. So when they talk a light year, they're talking about light travel, and that light could travel in 5,800 trillion miles. When we talk about the estimate, it's estimated to travel 100 trillion years today in space would take 62 years. So if you were to travel 100 trillion years in space, it would be equal to 62 years. So travel time to Alpha Centauri, it will take 15.5 years. But this is space travel. This is not taking a jet. Yeah, this is like, yeah. So we're talking about terrific speeds. The widest part of the galaxy, this is the Milky Way galaxy, is seen to be had. Because you notice the sun, you notice where we are? We're over here. We're towards the outside, which is really a perfect spot. Why is it perfect? Inside would be bombarded with all these gamma rays and everything else. Outside, we're not being infiltrated too much from the inside with all the different rays and all the different energy. The outside, we're kind of nicely hidden, because in the outside of this, there's a lot of debris flying around. And we would have to contend with that if we're the outside star, but we're inside, nicely protected, but in a position to observe the rest of the universe and to see us. So it's perfect. It's called, they title this the privileged planet. And so I believe in that. I believe in that very firmly. Now, we know that there's 700 billion galaxies. And if you go a little further, you'll see the diameter of the universe is estimated to be, ready for this, 42,000 trillion miles, one followed by 28 zeros. Now, it's always changing. So I need to let you know that when we look at the universe today, this 28 trillion, this 42,000 trillion miles is always changing. It's growing larger, bigger, because we know the Earth is expanding. Everything is expanding. The Earth, I mean, the universe is expanding, not the Earth. Everything is expanding. We see this everywhere. So when we look at the universe, These heavenly bodies emit light and other radiant energies through great distances. There are several 100 million galaxies. The total number of stars are septillion or trillion stars, trillion stars, and the number keeps getting bigger. So it's, ready for this, it's 10 to the 24th. In other words, it's 1 followed by 24 zeros. 12 is a trillion. So 10, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Got to go to 12. That's a trillion. It's a lot, that's a big number. But now when I say trillion, you got to go now 24 zeros. And so this is immense. Somebody did this kind of calculation. They said that if you were to count the stars with the technology today, 10 million stars in a second, it would take you 30 million years to count the number of stars. But that keeps changing, doesn't it? See, that means to me that God is big. How big is God? And that's the question. We see that the idea of infinite is described in space, is described in the numbers of stars. So the idea of science, of astronomy being the queen of science, I think fits very perfectly because it gives us an idea, no matter where we are in the universe, no matter where you are on Earth, you can see God's glory. You see the idea of infinite. You see the idea without limits, without boundaries. You see endless. You see countless. You see inestimable. You see the symbol of infinity. You see, that's infinity. So when I look out in space, I could see, yeah, that's an infinite God. So it's not the Big Bang I'm excited about. I'm excited about God and what he has to say to us. I love this verse. Lift up your eyes. And it says it's very beautiful in Isaiah 40:26. Lift up your eyes and look up to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls them each by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. So here we just showed you how big space was. We showed you that there's septillion trillion stars, which are trillion stars. And God says in Isaiah, in this verse, he says, not one is missing. That's God's power. So we get an idea when we look at God's creation, which affirms his word that God is massively big. The universe is there for us to see that and to experience it. Remember, our faith is one of experience. So when we move out and we look around, we should be able, God's word, we should be able to see him through his. So now we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this Big Bang myth, matter and energy, point 2. The universe is missing 95% of its matter and energy. Think about that. 95%. I don't know if you knew this, but this is true. You see, when we look at the universe composed of endless number of moving heavenly bodies traveling at tremendous speeds, all kept together by a missing matter and energy that is 95% absent, is termed respectively dark matter and energy. Dark matter, dark energy. Did you know that 95% of what you're looking out in space is missing, according to what they figured out? You might say, how does that happen? Well, listen, you have the Earth rotating on its axis 1,000 miles per hour. How did that happen? That's energy. Somebody had to force that planet to move. Okay. Then we look in terms of this. We look in terms of how fast the Earth is revolving around the sun. Okay. Its revolution can be measured 66,000 miles per hour. That's 30 times faster than a rifle bullet. So how did that happen? Then we go out and we take a look at the sun and our solar system. We're moving at 514,000 miles per hour. That's the sun. 514,000 miles per hour. Imagine that. So if we were to stop, everything would stop. You would be going 514,000 miles per hour. If the Earth would stop, it would be 1,000 miles per hour. If the solar system would stop, it would be 66,000 miles per hour. So when we look at this, we see that where is this coming from? This movement is fantastic. Milky Way galaxy moves, ready for this, 1.1 million miles per hour. The galaxies are moving this fast. And you might say, how are you measuring this? You can. You can measure this because we can see the galaxies. Now with our telescopes in space, we get accurate measurements. See, this is not make-believe. This is what became a real problem for scientists. Because as they looked around, they saw a dynamic universe moving, not standing still. Everything's moving. It's even expanding. Where is all this energy coming from? Where is all this matter coming from? You see, when we revolve around the sun, okay, there is gravitational pull that's happening all the time. We look at the moon gets pushed and swayed, so it doesn't look like a circle anymore. You follow me? So there's always something going on. It's a dynamic universe. And so we see this. How did this all begin? We saw the numbers of stars. We saw the space. Now we're seeing movement. So here's a big question. It had to have real big force to get things moving. Where did that force come from? See, I know the answer. Do you? I know it points to creator God, but this is what they say. The Big Bang. 13.8 million years ago, the Big Bang took place. And as you see, the Big Bang took place right here. And first stage here, we had just heat energy and all that. Then at 380,000 years, we started to get these particles, the photons started to break up, antimatter started to break up, and before we know it, we have more matter than antimatter. And so now matter occupies the universe. Now, I don't know. This is all what they say. And they calculated these dates. These calculations can be true because if you look at what they've done and how they figured out, okay, let's figure this out. If this happened this way, we can figure it out mathematically, you see? So it's a mathematical problem that's made on what? On a fairy tale, on a myth. So keep that in mind. So let's talk about the point of creation, the point where everything started. Now, if you caught him, he said 10 to the minus 43rd seconds and a temperature of 1 times 10 to the 30 K. That's 30 power. We have, listen, the sun is in Ks, it's maybe a million K, or, I mean, when we're talking about 30 powers, we're over a trillion. You follow me? We're over. So we have never, ever seen this kind of heat, all right? Ever. And so this has to be imagination. 10 to the minus 43rd second could be a true value because they've actually seen atoms split and so on. So they get an idea about these particles moving. So they kind of hypothesize that 10 to the minus 43rd seconds. So you see the hypothesis, you see the subjectivity in this kind of thing. And singularity is one of the biggest conjectures that you can think of. All matter, all energy at that particular point, matter and energy space comprised to make many billion times smaller than a proton. That's a cosmic seed. Exploded, undetermined reason continues to spread today. So I want to point that out. It's important because when we look at the model, everything's built on that. So what happens at 10 to the minus 43rd seconds to 10 to the minus 34th seconds? See, that's the first part. And we don't know. I mean, they make guesses, but the Big Bang caused matter and energy to separate and move outward at tremendous speeds. At some time, it had to coalesce and come together. I showed you earlier, I spoke to you earlier that we don't know how these matter with so much energy and moving so far apart can coalesce. They like to talk about cooling, but cooling really has to be magnified by a whole lot. I mean, we're talking very hot temperatures. Presently, there are numerous theories because the energy needed is missing. It's missing. It's not there, but they hold true to the theory, okay? When we look at the universe, we see that I just used this analogy of an atomic bomb exploding, okay? So the first thing I want to point out to you is that when an atomic bomb explodes, like Hiroshima, you have a velocity of 280 meters per second. In other words, if you're that close and it exploded, you'll be moving so fast. I mean, it would just blow you apart, literally. Now, the Big Bang is 50 orders to that number. 50 orders, 50 times that. Could you imagine that? That would be, I mean, we can't even imagine that kind of force. So the idea of this force that opens up the universe and expands can't be reproduced. We can't even think about it. So that's all kind of make believe. So when we look at this, we see this dark matter and energy, theoretical. They calculate this, and this is, there are more modern calculations. I'm just using this as round figures, but the invisible matter is 25%. Invisible dark clumps, matter providing anchors for galaxies and galaxy clusters. You know, the galaxies are moving, so they need something to grab onto. Like, for instance, you know, we are moving, the moon goes around the sun, revolves around the sun. Well, there is an anchor. What's the anchor? The Earth. So they're missing anchors in space of these things moving back, okay? The matter is missing 25%. 70% is the energy. Remember how we talked about the expanding universe, how it spreads out, how all of a sudden that energy was needed? It's missing. 70% is missing. So responsible for the Big Bang, acceleration, expansion of the universe. So what is left? Embarrassing to the cosmology, the dark stuff occupies 95% of the universe, while 5% is observable. So let's stop for a second and think about this. 95% of the universe is invisible. Now, these calculations are correct. I would imagine something is missing. You know what's missing? The faith in God. Who made this? Who put this? Remember the number of stars? Now we see the energy that put this universe together. See, that's pointing to God. So when we look at this data, we see this. I want you to take a look at this Milky Way galaxy. It's believed to have a haze around it, 10 times as massive as the disk and nearly 10 times as big as the diameter. That's what we're talking about. How does that Milky Way galaxy move? How does it form its shape? It needs mass to go around it. They don't have the mass, and here it is, 10 times as massive as the disk and nearly 10 times as big as the diameter. So what we're looking at is not, what we're looking at is that we're missing stuff all over the place. And why are we missing stuff? Because the magic ingredient is God. Now, we might find some stuff. I'm not saying we won't. We might find some stuff. But the magic ingredient is God. It points to God. It has to point to God. So as we look at that, we see this. We see at such places physics dissolves into metaphysics. These mathematical points admit of no explanation. They just are. Scientific American, March 2002. Roughly 50 forms of inflation have been proposed, named, and studied. That was by Brad Lemley from Discover, April 2002. The study of origins is the art of drawing sufficient conclusions from insufficient evidence. I repeat, the study of origins is the art of drawing sufficient conclusions from insufficient evidences. You see that? I hope I'm not boring you, but I'm just showing you clearly that what we have is we have a matter of faith. They have faith, we have faith. So when I look at this picture, I say, for this is what Isaiah 45, 18 says, for this is what the Lord says, he who created the heavens, he is God, who fashioned and made the earth, he founded it. He did not create it to be empty, but formed it to be inhabited. He says, I am the Lord, and there is no other. Again, I am the Lord, and there's no other. When you see the universe, you'll see that. That comes to the last myth, or the last point of the myth, and that's point number 3. Point number 3 dives in with the fact that this universe is really fine-tuned. The physical laws around it, mathematical constants that we use, mathematical equations with constants are everywhere. The universe, this points to a supernatural God. And that's what we have to conclude. So when we look at this, we see this man being hit by an apple falling out of the tree. You got to think Isaac Newton. So what happens when an apple hits your head? Now, when I teach this concept, I always talk about rides. See, I taught physics for many years, and one of the things I used to do is when I came to the idea of acceleration, that's fun. See, when you go on a ride, gravity takes over. And what happens is that when you get pushed, you're getting pushed at 32 feet per second, or 9.8 meters per second per second. What does that mean? You're moving at every second, you're getting faster and faster, every second faster, and it keeps getting faster. There's no way you could stop that fastness. The only way is maybe, I mean, theoretically, if you didn't have friction, there are things that stop us, but gravity is very, very important. But it deals with this idea of change over change. And so when we look at this, we see that the universe is fine-tuned with physical laws and mathematical constants demonstrate a supernatural intelligent designer. It defines how an inexplicable explosion can cause an order of the highest degree. So what I wanted to do is talk to you for a second about this idea of an apple falling on your head. You know, we could figure it out. And I'm not the one to do that. That was Isaac Newton. He gave us the idea of gravity. Did the universe with all its order come from a big bang that had no cause, or did they come from a divine watchmaker? See, Sir Isaac Newton and Rene Descartes declare that their answer is in the statement, the physical laws he had uncovered revealed the mechanical perfection of the workings of a universe to be akin to the watch within the watchmaker is God. So Newton kept on saying, hey, when I look at the universe, I see a fine-tuned universe. It reminds me of a clock. And in 1700s, you can imagine a clock was an ingenious way of discovery. So he used that. So what forces move those heavenly bodies? Well, strong nuclear forces keep us together. And they're very, very strong. You break them up, you have explosions. You have nuclear explosions like nuclear energy, like nuclear bombs, like being nuked, like what's going on. I've got nuke bombs, watch out. Well, there's another force called the weak nuclear force, which basically shows us that these forces want to go out. They not only want to go in, but they go out. And so we have forces that inside the atom that actually move the atom outside. Those forces make radioactivity. Electromagnetic forces, they're the forces that keep things together. So I use this expression, without electromagnetic forces, you basically, everything around here will be vacuumous. We couldn't see anything because the atoms are basically full of space. So when the atoms combine, the invisible atoms, you can see only just a small part. That's all. There's a small part, very, very small part. That's the nucleus, and that nucleus is filled with this electron space. This electron space actually comes together with another electron space. And it comes together and make you, make us, make everything. So what do we really observe? We observe nothing. Why? Because it's space. Very little is really matter. So inside this, you see inside this right in here, that's what we see. But most of the space, 1,000, 100,000 is basically space. So when I look at you and I look at matter, I look at everything around me, I know that there's a God. Say why? Because he holds everything together. The forces that hold us together are the forces that God has, all these forces are God's. And basically what he did was with these electromagnetic forces, he made the invisible become visible because you're invisible. The other thing that we find out with electromagnetic forces, that they interact with light. So I believe that the stars, yes, form light, but it wasn't the first light. See, the first light comes from God. God created the light. You follow me? The stars didn't create the light. The stars heated up and produced the light, produces the light that goes along with physics. But the light is God himself, is Christ himself. He produced the light. It says at the end times that God will be the light. Not the sun, be God's Christ light that will be manifested under. So think about that. So we interact with that light. And that light, because we interact with it, we can be seen. So God is this light, right? God comes to us. And through the light, he comes to us, and we are magnified because we interact with the light. The clothes that I have on, this blue color is only interaction with the light. Black is no interaction. So if we were all black, our skin was black, everything was really, really black, we wouldn't be able to see you. You follow? You only be contrast around. But what we are is that interaction. So God has everything perfectly planned, you see. And then, of course, the weakest force, you ready for this, is gravity. So that makes the objects go around, the big objects. So God, in his infinite majesty, decided to make the strongest forces the ones that we cannot even see. The atoms, the little atoms that, you need an electron microscope just to get around and see what you're doing. The outside forces, gravity, the weakest forces, is what keeps the universe together. Think about that. God put everything upside down to show us how great he is. You see, we just observe the weakest forces out there. We can observe them, we can test them, but when it comes to the inside forces, we can test them too. I mean, when Einstein came around, he gave us the idea of splitting an atom. We take that matter and turn it into energy. So we understand that. But this whole idea that gravity, the weakest forces of all, controls the universe. So when Newton took a look at this concept, the universe and its heavenly bodies function as a fine-tuned machine. I don't know if I'd even like the word machine nowadays. I like to talk about the most finest tunest thing you ever did see. The best invention to ever happen. That's the universe. So let's get back to that apple. Okay. There is Sir Isaac Newton, and he discovered gravity. Watch this. Watch this. It's coming. There you go. See, he didn't let it go. When that body accelerated, he said this. He said that the mass of the Earth, the mass of that body, if I times that 2 and figure out the space between them, that's the radius, and multiply it by my constant, I can figure out the force that's going to hit your head. That's the weight. Now, I teach this to all my students, but here's a fundamental concept. See, mass is equivalent to, when we think of mass and weight, we think it together, but the bottom line is this. Mass itself is particles, like I showed you, the inside of the atom. That's it. But here's the thing. When Newton sat down, he kind of made this equation up, and later on, we finally found out what it was. You see that G in there? That G is a constant. That G never, ever changes. See, with that equation, I can figure out the weight of you anywhere in the universe. If you said, let's go to Jupiter, I'll go to Jupiter with you, and I can figure out the weight that you're going to be. It's going to be a lot heavier. You see? Because I know the G. What's the G? Ready for this? It's a constant. 6.67 times 10 to the minus 8 centimeters squared, gram squared. It works every time. His equation, that equation works anywhere in the universe. So when you go and you weigh yourself and somebody says, oh, this is the weight that you are in Mars, or this is the weight that you use somewhere else, they use this equation. It's not hard. As soon as they get your weight, they plug it in and there you go. So you see the idea of gravity for the most massive things. So what do we have? Well, when you look at the universe, we can't help it but see constants. This is the mass of an electron. I'm not going to even try to talk about it. Its mass is so small. It's the mass of a proton. These make up the atoms. Very, very small. But if you change the weights of these things, the whole universe goes. It's constant. You follow me that when we look at the universe and we look at the laws like Newton did, we get constants. The constants are what control us. They control the whole universe. When we look at the fact that these constants can be figured out, we see 26 fundamental physical constants that address the particles of law that define the interactions, making this a fine-tuned universe. And here are some of them. Here's Boltzmann's constant and elementary charge constant. I use some of these. When I taught high school and college, I use these things, these constants. They work. Now, tell me, where did you get the constants from? The laws. Where did the laws come from? It's a fine-tuned universe. See, I don't understand how anybody can believe in a Big Bang and believe in the junk that is being taught. I hate to say it, but that's what it is. When you can take these equations and then it shows to me that there's an orderly creator in God. Of course, Newton understood this. See, he was unbelievable. He wrote the Principia, the most important and influential work on physics of all times. He spent a part of his life, a very small part of his life, working on Principia and other things we call the mechanical universe. We use them in all our physics books. He spent the other 3/4 of his time studying the Bible. He believed in the Word of God. Most of the men who followed science, who made science, were biblically taught. They understood God's word, and Newton was one of them. And we see that Newton single-handedly contributed more than the development of science than any other individual in history. We take a look and we see that he believed in intelligent designer. He says this, and this is a great Newton. Get back here. Sorry. Not there. Okay. Newton believed that the universe and all things in it proceeded from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. He felt that the supreme God exists necessarily by the same necessity exists always and everywhere. Some people think that Newton just walked off, set the watch, and that was it. The absent watchmaker. Wrong. I've seen that in the literature. That's terribly wrong. Look what he says here. The same necessity exists always and everywhere. God is everywhere. He exists everywhere. So Newton didn't believe in an absent watchmaker. He said the watchmaker is ever present. It's always there. He's watching it as it ticks. So we go to Colossians and we see this. We see Colossians, and in him all things hold together. And that we know of. When I think of the forces of the universe, when I think of all the things around us, this is how I conclude. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So when I look at this, I see it very clearly as I summarize this myth that goes through 3 basic foundations. 3 basic points. 1, we review. Number 1 is that when we go back and we see that the universe itself, by understanding the Big Bang Theory, there's really, when I say understanding, there's no understanding of the Big Bang Theory. They don't understand the mechanism. They don't understand how it began. And so this big explosion cannot be explained. Let's keep that straight. Number 2, as you saw, the universe is missing what? Matter and energy. Where did that come from? It's missing. They call it dark. They're still trying to find it. Where's the dark energy? Where's the dark matter? They're looking for it. And if they find something, I mean, congratulations, that's God. I mean, God leaves us in questions and we're always searching for him. But I see his handiwork everywhere. And the last thing is that when we look at the universe, we see God's intelligent design. He holds everything together.